Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Tuesday afternoon. A lot to get into with the Georgia Bulldogs. We got a commitment, which Ben and I talked about on Thursday. We're going to dive a little bit more into that. We're going to talk about the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Bowl, talk about Super Bowl 59 coming up with a lot of Bulldogs in it, and talk very briefly about National Signing Day. As hard as it is to believe, this is the February signing week, and that'll come up on Wednesday, though Georgia seems to be sitting pretty when it comes to that. But fellas, let's start with the news from last week. The door appearing to be open now for Colbie Young to come back to Georgia for the 2025 season. On Wednesday, Young reached a plea deal with the solicitor's office in Athens, Clarke County on his domestic violence case. The receiver pled no contest to disorderly conduct. He received 12 months probation, a $500 fine, must complete a family violence intervention program. But you look at this and going back to when he was practicing with the team toward the end of the 2024 season, it seemed that Georgia was hopeful that Colbie's situation could be resolved. His legal situation could be resolved. He has reached that point, and Georgia has not said anything about his status for 2025. But I do believe from what we've heard behind the scenes and what is going on, especially in the last week, that Colbie has an opportunity to be back at Georgia for the 2025 season. I'm going to start with you, Ben. What is your reaction to the news with Colbie, and especially if he does come back to Georgia, which is my expectation, just what that means for Georgia going forward?
Well, I know there's a lot of folks relieved that they finally reached a legal conclusion. I know this was something that got drawn out, extensively throughout the course of the year. And I think there were moments throughout the year where Georgia felt that there might be some clarity one way or the other, whichever way it played out on this situation sooner than it did. I mean, from a football standpoint, if Colbie Young is in fact coming back, which everything that I've had conversations on, the expectation is that he wants to be back, that Georgia wants him back. There's a reason that he's been practicing through the last couple of months. I mean, I think this is a big addition. I think that losing Colbie Young and Ra Thomas had a direct correlation to the downturn that Carson Beck had in the middle of the season when it came to turnovers. I just think he lost some of his reliability options at wide receiver, and we have talked plenty, probably overkill, about the wide receiver situation during the 2024 season. But as we forecast into the 2025 season, like, they just brought in a 6'6" body in Noah Thomas. They've got a guy in Colbie Young now, 6'5", that has been used. Both of them are better than 50-50 targets. Like, when you are trying to get the ball to them down the field, both of them are going to be, better than 50-50. And I think that, assuming that everything stays on track and he comes back, I mean, I think that if we're just being, totally honest here, like, Georgia's had a situation like this in the past where a guy had a legal circumstance and then he stayed around on the team and then he ended up having another legal circumstance and left. So I think that there's a reason why Georgia is not trying to be very vocal about this situation. I think that, wisely, I think they want to move along with the business the way that it is and just hope that everybody stays on track and that they have a wide receiver that they were really hoping that they had last season. I will also say, and I don't know, Kip, I think you would probably know better than me on this, the JUCO ruling, like, has that already been settled so that Colbie Young doesn't even have to do anything to get any approvals? Like, he's already set in stone. If he wants to come back, he can be back.
Technically, there's been a waiver established for this year, and they're still involved in that case against Diego Fava. But the NCAA established a rule for this upcoming season that if, you had you just exhausted your eligibility, that you would be eligible for a waiver. So I still think every player has to go through that process. It's not automatically established for everyone, but I think that Georgia's operating under the assumption that he has another year of eligibility, or else, he wouldn't have really been in practice, or he wouldn't still be going through, through all the workouts in the off season. So I don't think that, you can make any assumptions, but I think the plan as of now is just that he applies for the waiver like everyone else. And he expects to get that waiver.
Kipp, what do you think about the potential of Colbie coming back and what it would mean for this offense, particularly with a first-time starter, likely being Gunnar Stockton running the show?
Yeah, I'm gonna just bring back an old Chip Careyism and say, getting Colbie Young is like landing someone from the transfer portal, without using up any of your NIL budget. I guess would be the way to transfer that. I mean, it's if he were in the transfer portal, he would be one of the top 10 receivers for sure available. So I think in that aspect, you have to be excited about the possibility of him rejoining this offense. Everyone kind of talks about now, I guess the trendier option is to have guys who can make plays in space. You want separation. You want to be able to stretch the field horizontally as well as vertically. My opinion is, Georgia was pretty good in the red zone the last couple of years, but as far as just guys that can make contested catches, they didn't have those type of guys. So you get Noah Thomas, you bring in Colbie Young into that situation as well. I don't think, I think people make too much of that these are guys that at the same time don't need to create as much separation to be able to make plays. I think it's still a difficult matchup for cornerbacks to tackle these guys one-on-one. And I just don't think you can have enough red zone weapons. You add size of position. You have now multiple guys that you could put out there along with CJ Wiley. You have size in that room. And I just think that during red zone, you're going to draw a lot of attention with those kind of guys. And the fact that Gunnar Stockton worked with, Colbie Young a lot last offseason just helps even more. They already have some chemistry built up. So I just think that, a guy that already knows the offense and can deliver big plays when you need him to on a consistent basis is huge for Georgia's offense moving forward, especially when you think about you're asking a lot of guys who are new and still learning the offense that you've added through the transfer portal and your freshman class. You're asking these guys to learn quickly. Having a guy who already knows this offense from being here a year ago, I think it's just really going to help spring and summer workouts for this team.
Totally agree. And the fact that, like you said, Kip, he's been in this offense and just the experience even before he got to Georgia. I mean, this is a guy that had played at Miami that understands, what's expected of him. And, not only that offseason work with Gunnar Stockton, but I look to those Sugar Bowl practices. I mean, it seemed like Colbie was making plays during those practices. I think that him coming back is only going to be a boost for this Georgia offense. And yes, Hugh in the comments was asking about that waiver. I did want to bring up another situation with Georgia baseball. Dylan Goldstein is a guy that is expecting to use that JUCO waiver. Dogs 24/7's Olivia Sayer had reported on that last week. She had a really good story on Goldstein practicing with the team. They're still kind of waiting, like you said, Kip, to get official word. So, yeah, that's not just a football situation. That's one to watch with some other Georgia sports as well. All right, Kip, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about Georgia's latest commit, Zack Fort, committed on Thursday. Ben did such a good job with his predict a commit on the Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show. Nailed it. I mean, wasn't even probably an hour or two after we started recording that he winds up getting that one. But, the fifth commit for Georgia in this 2026 class, really talented safety from IMG Academy. Kip, what do you think about this pickup? Again, the fifth commitment in Georgia's 2026 class.
I mean, him as a player, a lot of things to like. I just can't get over the fact that this kid was a captain as a freshman at IMG Academy. I just think, you guys may have already talked about that, but I just think that just that leadership. I mean, the fact that, you see it actually on the film too, because he's pre-snap, he's making these calls, he's getting guys in the right position. That just is invaluable to me personally, just knowing what Georgia's asked at this position in recent years. And you start thinking about, Javon Bullard, Tyke Smith, just guys that were asked to do a lot of things in that secondary. This guy seems like he has that mental makeup you look for to be a safety at Georgia. And he brings violence to the position. He, the height, people are going to look at, if he's 5'10", if he's 5'11", his weight right now. I see long arms. I see an athlete who can run and, a guy that seems like he just genuinely wanted to commit to Georgia based on, the articles that Ben put out last week. So I think, you look back at a guy like Chris Smith, when he came to Georgia, the size initially was something that he worked to improve the other aspects of his game to overcome maybe those physical limitations of not being the biggest guy in the field. But by the end of his time at Georgia, I mean, he was one of the best playmakers Kirby Smart's had on that defense, just always making a play. And I just think that this is a guy that, whether he plays star or safety, seems to have, that it factor at the position. So really, I love the pickup for Georgia, getting it, this time of the cycle. I think he's a guy that, everyone that's like, I'll wait till signing day, or, I'll wait till they actually arrive at Georgia. I think he genuinely seems like the type that his recruitment is locked in, and he feels like, he's going to focus on his future at Georgia.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend, if people didn't listen to the last Stay Wolk EJ recruiting show, to listen to the end of that episode, where not only did Ben and I talk about Zack Fort, but also Ben played a clip of an interview, part of the interview with him about committing and what he saw in Georgia and why he picked Georgia. Ben, any other thoughts on Zack Fort? Anything else you want to share before we move it along?
Well, Kipp, I got to ask you, is it bad form? Am I taking advantage of Jordan by making a predictive commit in that form the way that I did during our show?
I think that's exactly how you should make them. You have to wield this power somehow. I mean,
okay, I just didn't know. I didn't know if I was just bullying Jordan on our show or not by doing that. But I'm in a total agreement with Kipp. I mean, I think even conversations that I've had since a lot of the content that I've put out at Dawgs 24/7 about Zack Fort is like, everybody is blown away by just the way this guy approaches his business. Like, I think that's probably, to Kipp's point, you don't look at him and say he blows you away with his size. He doesn't, when he tests and things like that, he's not blowing you away with some of his ability there. So it makes you say, like, why does Georgia take an early commitment from a guy like Zack Fort, knowing some of those testing and measurable things aren't where he's going to be A+? And it's because everything about his identity fits in line perfectly with what Georgia wants from its defensive backs. It's not a comparison that I had heard yet, Kipp, with Chris Smith, but I love that one. Like, I think that it is a perfect indicator of why Kirby Smart in particular would be willing to take a commitment so early for a guy like Zack Fort, because he sees so many similarities between someone like Chris Smith that a lot of people had doubts about, that a lot of people maybe weren't even willing to go all the way in for because of some of those measurable concerns. And like you said, a playmaker is a playmaker. And sometimes I think Georgia, as much as they've had those, physical freaks at defensive back over the last few years, they haven't had a ton of game-changing playmakers when it comes to creating turnovers on a consistent basis. And I think that that's something that they're looking for.
Yeah, I think that just based on the film we watched, Ben, on that episode, I was really impressed, and it's hard not to like what you saw there. Ben, I don't know if you can say the same thing, especially because you are the recruiting reporter for our site, but I'd kind of forgotten that the February signing day was coming up this week, that it was right around the corner. A lot of folks on the board asking about that, and so used to this being the day. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. Georgia signed, I believe, 28 guys back in December. What do the folks need to know about this National Signing Day for Georgia? Are there any names that folks should keep an eye out for?
I mean, admittedly, I know this isn't the best. Don't tell the 24/7 sports powers that be, but I mean, I don't really see much going on for Georgia from a 2025 recruiting standpoint tomorrow. They're not entirely done with the 2025 class yet. They just had a cornerback, Javari Flowers from South Florida, that reclassified. He was on a visit this past weekend. I know he spent a lot of time with Kirby Smart, Dante Williams, Travaris Robinson, a couple of other recruits that were on their junior day visits. He's likely going to take some official visits in the early March timeframe. I know that Miami, Florida, and Georgia are three programs that are definitely still involved in this thing. I don't even want to go as far as to say I think Georgia is like the main player in this by any means, but it's a name that we're keeping an eye on. That said, it's not something that I'm anticipating having anything happen tomorrow on Wednesday, February 5th for the traditional National Signing Day. We'll have, because I know that some of y'all have that National Signing Day appetite still a little bit. So we'll have, some superlative types of things, meet the class types of things, just so you can get to know what happened in the December early signing period, but I think this is something you can just get accustomed to as a Georgia fan. Like, Georgia is adapting with the calendar, and what that means is they are going to utilize that early signing period to the fullest extent. If there is an example here or there of a guy that they could use during the traditional signing period, they might. Javari Flowers is sort of a weird example this year. Terry Bussey was an example last year that they were still trying to get this time of year, but I wouldn't expect it to be a regular occurrence. And as we've seen with Terry Bussey, and I probably wouldn't favor Georgia for Javari Flowers right now, the likelihood of Georgia ultimately signing those guys probably isn't that high either. Full attention is turned to the 2026 class. But that said, we still want to whet the National Signing Day appetite. So we'll still have some stuff for you tomorrow over at Dawgs 24/7.
And to Ben's point, there will be a 60% off sale going on as part of that. So I cannot encourage y'all enough to jump on that because it's a good deal, especially with, again, we got a little bit over a month before spring practice starts. So it will be here before you know it. We're going to take a quick break, come back and talk about the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Bowl, several Bulldogs stepping up and showing out in both of those all-star games. Super Bowl 59, fair share of Georgia players that are getting ready to play in the big game down in New Orleans. And we'll also talk about Georgia basketball. Guys, we expected some big things from some former Bulldogs last week at the All-Star games, and it seemed like several guys stepped up. When you looked at the Senior Bowl, you had Trevor Etienne making noise, Smile Munden, Dan Jackson. Those were in the practices. You go to the Shrine Bowl, which was in Dallas. Going through some of the stats, Dominic Lovett, 2 receptions for 16 yards. Nazir Stackhouse had a tackle in that game. And then the Senior Bowl, as far as the game itself, Arian Smith, 2 receptions for 37 yards, did have a fumble. Dan Jackson, 3 tackles, 1 pass breakup. Smile Munden, 2 tackles, 1 pass breakup. Trevor Etienne, who I mentioned, was really, really big in the practices. Didn't do a ton in the actual game. 5 carries for 12 yards. And then Ty Ingram Dawkins with 2 tackles to end the Senior Bowl. So I'm going to start with you, Kipp. When you look at really both of those all-star games, who are the guys that you thought really rose to the occasion, former Bulldogs who you think helped their draft stock before we start really talking about this thing in the next couple months?
I mean, I think you have to start with Dan Jackson. The man was voted on as a captain, by his teammates, the guys that went up against him all week in practice, had 3 tackles in the game and a pass breakup. I think we're talking about a guy that, again, I mean, he's been doubted at every single aspect of his career. I mean, I think what Kirby made the joke that he didn't really even know who he was when he got to Georgia and been counted out, questioned as why he's on the field, then had multiple years as a starter at Georgia, declares for the draft. People just kind of like, yeah, of course you're declaring for the draft. But now there's a chance that he hears his name called in this draft, and kind of rightfully so. I mean, the man's got put up NFL film, went to the Senior Bowl, and showed he belonged against guys that are going to be drafted. And so I think at this point, the fact that he's going from a guy that may have been in the 500 to 600s on the boards, and I'll be honest, they go that far. These draft boards go up to like 800, 900 players, because you're also talking about undrafted free agents. You want to get those guys in as well. But even that, still, there's about 250, 255 picks in the draft. And now Dan's made his case that he might be in that top 250. That's a huge jump, just numbers wise, based on, the fact that, Trevor Etienne, Smile Munden had strong weeks. Those guys were already in the mix for fourth or third round. So we're talking about, maybe they improved their stock 30, 40 spots, which is really big for them. But just Dan being on that draft radar has to stand out to me, because we're talking about, maybe he was already high on everyone's boards, but now the media, we're seeing, is Dan Jackson going to get drafted? I think that's like a 500 spot increase if you're just technically speaking on the media draft boards. At this point, when we start getting into 7-round mocks, he's going to be on some of those now. So credit to him for just going out there and just doing what he's done his entire career, which is go out there and just play football and not worry about what anyone thinks and keep the noise out. So great job, Dan.
Ben, what about you? Who do you feel like really helped himself as far as this draft goes?
Well, I completely agree with Kipp on Dan Jackson. Like I thought last week when we talked about this, I thought that he was somebody that was going to get out. And once he gets exposure to people just realize good football players are good football players. Someone I'm fascinated by, I think y'all probably know where I'm going with this one, but I cannot wait to see what the NFL teams do with Arian Smith, because he gets into a setting like this. And we talked about it all year. Like one of the, his biggest faults, I guess you could say, is like he was one of the only people at Georgia that could be consistently open this year. And so Georgia had no choice but to target him more than they probably felt like they should have or needed to, given what his drop rate was. But he is always open. And I think that you saw that this week, like going up against some of the top DBs at the Senior Bowl. Like he was always open in one-on-one situations. He got open a couple of times during the game. He's going to test like off the charts in certain areas when he actually gets the opportunity to do that in front of scouts. I know what many of the conversations have been about Arian Smith in our world, and rightfully so, where the criticisms have come in. And I know that he had to answer to a lot of those criticisms throughout the week, and he didn't even do like everything to put those away. Like you mentioned, Jordan, I think he had a fumble during the game as well. So there's still like a ball security concern there, and I get that. But I feel like one of these teams is going to fall in love with him. And I was joking with you all, like, hear me out, first round pick, Arian Smith. Obviously that was an exaggeration, but it makes me wonder where he's going to have a chance to go to. And I just feel like a week like this one, where there's so much good clips out there on him, that I think someone is going to say like, oh, the drop concerns, like we can fix that. That's not a problem. Like, oh, Georgia's been trying to solve that for 5 years. Yeah, no issue. Like we're going to be able to do that. Like, I just feel like someone is going to take that chance. And I feel like a week like this goes a long way in terms of, convincing somebody to be able to do that. So I thought it was a good week for Arian.
I totally agree. And it's something that I brought up, I think, when we were first previewing the Senior Bowl, that with a guy like Arian Smith, all it takes is one GM. All it takes is one front office to say, that's our guy and we can fix him. And I'm sure y'all saw this too on social media. And I think this was a little over the top, but some Georgia fans being like, who is this guy? He wasn't doing this at Georgia. And yeah, he did have issues with drops, but I mean, he made plays. We're never going to forget that Peach Bowl where, I don't think Georgia wins that game if he does not catch that 76-yard touchdown. He had his moments. He just was very inconsistent, but yeah, he's getting drafted. I don't know how high up, but somebody's going to fall in love with him. And the only other person that I would call out is Trevor Etienne, just because we know how devalued that running back position is. And I think that him having the week he had, especially catching the ball, I think that helped his stock quite a bit. From what I had seen in the lead up to this week, I've seen his name included on some like top 100 players of the draft list. Obviously, that's going into like the third round of the draft, but I thought he really helped himself. And also want to shout out Smile Munden. I think he played well. I think he's going to have to answer questions about injuries, but it was good to see him have the week he had. I think he's got a chance to not only get to the league, but to stick around for a while. All right, guys, let's talk about Super Bowl 59. This is going to be the 24th straight year that at least one Georgia player is in the game. If you're listening to this and trying to decide which team you want to pull for, if you're going off of Georgia players, you're going to be rooting for the Eagles, the Philadelphia Eagles, with 5 guys who are able to play: Nolan Smith, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, Keely Ringo, Lewis Seen. You got another guy, Nakobe Dean, who got hurt during the playoffs, so he won't be around. Then on the Kansas City Chiefs side, the only former Georgia player that'll be able to play, Malik Herring. Mecole Hardman got hurt toward the end of the regular season and wasn't able to come back in time for the postseason, wound up on IR. Ben, is there any one of these Georgia players you're really intrigued about as far as this Super Bowl? A guy that you think has a chance to really show out and to make some noise, on the biggest stage of football.
I think it's been really fun to watch Nolan Smith's growth throughout the course of this year. I mean, this is another guy like I talked about this similarly with Zack Fort earlier in the show, but it's like there's certain guys where when you hear people that work with them talk about them, it's like everyone shares the exact same opinion about these guys, and I feel like that's the case with Nolan Smith. It's like you listen to his coaches, high school, college, NFL. You listen to his teammates, high school, college, NFL. Everyone just loves the guy and loves being around the guy. They love his energy. Just he has a charisma that goes beyond the caliber of football player that he is. And then you throw in the fact that he's having a historic run as far as Eagles pass rushers go in the playoffs. He had significant statistical strides this year over year. I mean, this is also like people rewrite the history on this, I feel like, but if you go back and look when he was like a freshman and sophomore in college and he had the 5-star label on him and Georgia hadn't accomplished anything yet, like there were people using like the buzzword on Nolan Smith and saying things that are just outrageous. And I hope that this is a lesson for everyone to just don't jump to these outrageous conclusions 1 year, 2 years into a guy's career. Like Georgia knows what it's doing when it signs a guy like Nolan Smith. The Eagles know what it's doing when it drafts a guy like Nolan Smith in the first round. Like they really, really do. And I think that it's been fun to watch him. I mean, he has, like I said, his charisma alone, I think makes him someone that you root for. I know if Kipp agrees with me on this. It's hard to do when he's in Philadelphia. Like it's hard to say, man, I really want these guys in Philadelphia to have a lot of success, but Nolan Smith makes it a hell of a lot easier.
Kipp, what about you? Is there a guy or two guys that you're really going to be paying attention to? These former Bulldogs getting ready to play in this game in New Orleans.
I hate the Super Bowl so much, but I'm so happy for these guys just because, I mean, they were the heart and soul of Georgia's, the best teams that they may ever put on the football field. And to see them carry that same success and, to be the solid foundation for the future of this Eagles team. For Georgia fans, you can't help but be Philly Dogs fans, even though I would assume most people are not Eagles fans because they I mean, at the end of the day, you really have no reason to root for a franchise like that other than the fact that they have these Georgia players. But I mean, you look at this defensive line and you're going up against a guy whose release is so quick and the arm angles that he uses. The best quarterback of their generation. That is the key to this game is, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis just freeing it up for Nolan Smith. The fact that that is what the Chiefs have to game plan for is that's just one huge advertisement for Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann. Like the fact that the greatest quarterback of right now and possibly ever is having to watch film and see, I've got to get this ball out or these guys are going to be in my face. And so, I mean, that is an easy storyline that makes this Super Bowl much more palatable, for people who are not, Eagles fans. And that's myself included. I'm fascinated by that to see, do they have the blueprint, the key to success to do this year? I know that this is, a repeat, but the roles that these guys are playing are very different because unlike the team that I follow, this front office had a plan in place. They drafted guys who already had Pro Bowlers ahead of them on this defense. They learned from them and they stepped into these roles. And you've seen it in the playoffs, as you said, with Nolan Smith, that he has, come to life and seen, a breakout playoff run for him. But the fact that Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter are just the guys that every offense has to scheme for and establish that, we have to make plays outside of the pocket because these guys are going to be in our face very quickly. I just think that makes this, a very intriguing Super Bowl. I want to see if they can get Mahomes on the ground and actually find a way to tackle him without drawing a flag, it's really, it's the impossible task. They're going to have to maybe pull his shoestrings or something. And, I don't know the key to that. We haven't seen it. Maybe, if Jordan Davis lifts Patrick Mahomes up in the air, there's probably a time limit. It probably is 2 to 3 seconds to where he has to gently put him down on the ground before a flag is called. But I think it just makes this very entertaining, and it's a great storyline for people in the the Southeast, for all the Georgia fans to watch. Their former players, the ones that brought titles to Athens, possibly bring a Super Bowl ring to a city that just really doesn't deserve it at all.
I was going to read this comment from Tom Slick08 on YouTube. So true on Nolan Smith being called a bust. Shake my head. So happy that he's putting it together as a pass rusher, a true leader too. And to that leader standpoint, we played the clip a few weeks ago of Nick Sirianni just totally singing his praises. And it's so neat seeing some of the post games where Nolan's talked and just some of the stuff he shared about, freeing things up for the guys around him and letting people around him make plays. I mean, he's just it's been great to see him. And to the point that Kipp was making, to me, I think that this game's going to hinge on Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. I think combined, they probably need at least 2 sacks for me to think that Philadelphia's got a chance. They have got to get in there to affect Patrick Mahomes. We know how effective Mahomes can be, and especially on this stage. I think about the Super Bowl they lost to the Buccaneers, where he looked like something out of a video game. He's throwing passes 40 yards downfield horizontal and just couldn't get guys around him to make plays. But I really look to Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. They have to step up. But the good news, if you're a Philly fan, is that they've been in these big moments before, back when they were in college, and they rose to the occasion and they put their team in position to win. They did it at Georgia, and I think they have a really good chance to do it on Super Bowl Sunday. So before we change this conversation, I'm going to put you guys on the spot. I'm going to start with you, Kipp. Give me your Super Bowl pick. Who wins this game? Give me a score between the Eagles and the Chiefs.
Man, I said all that I said about this Eagles team. I'm not going to bet against Patrick Mahomes. And I just think that once this game starts, they're going to get every call you could possibly get. It's just, again, I've seen it every single game, during the season, especially in the playoffs, it just increases. I will say that the Chiefs win 27-21.
All right, Ben, where are you going?
I tend to agree with Kipp in these scenarios where it's like you go with the quarterback. I think Patrick Mahomes is every bit of everything everyone talks about Patrick Mahomes being. There's just something about this Eagles team to me. I don't know what it is. I feel like this. Look, this Chiefs team, for all the hate that we've given the Falcons this year, this Chiefs team was one pass interference call away from losing to the Falcons this season. So they have shown flaws all season long, and I just feel like eventually something's got to give there, and I think that the Eagles are good enough to do it. I'm going to say Eagles 31. I'm going to say Chiefs 21. I think the Eagles win by double digits.
I'm going to go with Ben. I'm going to give the Eagles a 23-20 win, and I think, the defense we just talked about, I think they're able to affect Patrick Mahomes. But the thing that's so frustrating, and Ben just hit on this, I really don't think this Chiefs team is that good. They have just been in this moment so many times going through the playoff. They understand how to rise to the occasion. And I think that Saquon Barkley is going to run wild on this defense. Saquon is just on another level right now. I think he understands. And I think that the Philly, these Eagles understand. Let's just give Saquon the ball. I have them winning this one by 3. I think a lot of Georgia fans would be happy if that plays out that way. But, at the same time, I understand where Kipp's coming from. Why would you bet against Kansas City at this point? It's like the Patriots. I saw people trying to make the argument like, oh, yeah, those Patriots were so much more lovable than these Chiefs. Are you kidding me? Any dynasty that wins like they have been winning, it's not fun. Everyone wants to see them lose. So I see the argument, but I'm going with Philly. I think a bunch of dogs get some rings and that they wind up winning this one by 3.
I know it's an unpopular take, but I love watching Patrick Mahomes play football. I know everyone gets frustrated, but I really just he has a Steph Curry feel to me, where there's a lot of people that just don't like the way that he plays or the way that they operate, whatever. But it's just so fun to watch.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I love the way he plays. I mean, that the angles that the plays that he can make, where you just think he's going down, and then all of a sudden the ball just comes out, and you're like, how does it get there? Like, you've only really seen like a guy like Stafford, who just has a rocket out there, able to hit the angles that he does. But he just looks like, I mean, you're right. It's complete Steph Curry. He could just not even see the guy, and all of a sudden, the guy just gets the perfect pass thrown to him. So it's just, you combine that with the fact that I agree with Hugh over there. I think that the script's already been handed down by Taylor Swift, and they have no choice but to acknowledge it, that this is exactly how this is going to play out. And I've seen, Patrick play better with a worse group of wide receivers. The pass catchers he has now. I mean, it's like, how do you keep letting them get all of these weapons? And that's exactly where this team is. And I also think that Trip Duffy is an underrated, an elite cornerback who can tackle. And I think that's kind of be the difference in the game. I think he's going to have a turnover late in the game to clinch it for the Chiefs.
The only thing that I have a problem with Pat Mahomes, which was hit on earlier, is just that, he gets all the calls, which is going to happen when you're at his status. But the trying to give yourself up and still getting a penalty, I just hate seeing that. I get they're going to protect the quarterback, especially a guy like Mahomes, but it's not fun to watch. I can tell you that. Kipp, before we change the talking point here, you wrote earlier this week about the latest ESPN mock draft has the Atlanta Falcons getting Mykel Williams. We're a long way away from that happening, seeing how this plays out, but I want to get your thoughts, especially knowing what the Falcons need. What would you think if they wound up with Mykel Williams?
I'd be completely shocked like everyone else. I think that, we all have to assume that for that to happen, Luther Burden would have to pull out of the draft. Colston Loveland, the tight end from Michigan, would have to already be off the board as well. I think, you keep looking at guys they can take other than Mykel Williams. I mean, Jalen Milroe's a guy that they would probably have very high on their board, because if Kirk Cousins is going to move on in the offseason, they're going to need some quarterback depth there. So there's every scenario other than, actually taking a top 15 player to position need who happens to play at Georgia makes more sense than that. So it's good to go ahead, which is why I went ahead and wrote it. Let's go ahead and get these projections out of the way now in February, before the combine happens and these guys skyrocket into the top 10, because we know that, between Mykel Williams, Malachi Starks, and Jalen Walker, those guys are going to test off the charts at the combine and then the pro days as well. So go ahead and get them out of the way now. So those guys all go top 15 before for the Falcons even get their pick in. I think now is the time to go ahead and eliminate the 3% chance that Mykel Williams is an Atlanta Falcon. So I think now is the perfect time to talk about it. He would be a great fit, and I think he has yet to play his best football. He's a guy that's going to be a better player 2 to 3 years from now than he is right now. Not to say that he's not a great player right now, but he's a guy that could be, an 8 to 10 sack guy who also plays the run really well. I can't imagine what the Falcons would do with a guy like that, because they haven't drafted a guy like that since Patrick Kearney in the 90s, and they haven't had a pass rusher since John Abraham. So why would they bring one in now?
I was going to say, you said you can't imagine. I was going to say keep imagining, because they probably won't do it. UGA men's basketball minute before we get out of here. Up and down week last week for Georgia basketball. They beat South Carolina 71-60 on Tuesday, a game they had to win, game they had to have. They're at home. They take care of business. Then they go on the road to Alabama, and things didn't go quite as Georgia hoped. 90-69 loss to Alabama. Close game for a half, and then Alabama took the thing over and took care of business there in Tuscaloosa. Georgia now 15-7 overall, 3-6 in SEC play, which is halfway through conference play for the Bulldogs. Got another big opportunity Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time in Athens against LSU. Another one that I think is very similar to that South Carolina game. Got to defend the home court, especially before Mississippi State comes to town on Saturday. Ben, your rant on the last episode about Georgia basketball was a hit. I've had several people point it out, several comments about, hey, that's exactly, Ben was right, and that Ben was making a good point with where the team is. I wrote about this on Monday. This team is still in a pretty good spot as far as the NCAA tournament. Obviously, got to take care of business with some of the games ahead. But what do you think about where Georgia basketball is, especially coming into this week?
Well, I got to clip that Ben was right that you just threw right there. I'm gonna have to hold that for keepsake in important situations. Last week went the way that it was supposed to go. I mean, it was like I said, like things were going to go the way that they were going to go in Tuscaloosa. In fact, that last minute and a half of the first half against Alabama, things sort of spiraled. I thought Georgia maybe could have hung around a little bit longer than they did had it not gone that way at the end of the first half. South Carolina game did a great job of holding on to home court, of really kind of controlling and dominating that game. I don't think there was ever a moment where it felt like South Carolina was going to win that game. And I think that this upcoming week, it's the same way. I mean, I think you have to win on Wednesday against LSU. Like that is another, like the South Carolina game, another must win. If you lose that game, there are just not enough wins out there for you to be able to collect a tournament resume, I don't think. The Mississippi State one is a fascinating one because it was one that I have sort of viewed as a toss-up, but with Missouri playing the basketball that they're playing right now, like circling Missouri later in the year at home as a win is not a safe thing to do at all. So that I think that brings that Mississippi State game into extreme focus where it's like, all right, if you win on LSU or on Wednesday against LSU and do what you're supposed to do, I'm not saying it's a must win against Mississippi State, but if you win that one against Mississippi State, I think you can finally start to breathe a little bit easier than you have been. I maintain everything that I said in that previous rant about how I feel about this basketball team. Like, yes, it's not perfect, but there are elements of this team that are significant upgrades year over year from last year, and they play winning basketball at times. Are they going to turn the ball over maybe more than you're comfortable with? Yes. Are they going to miss? Like that first half, shooting the ball from deep was miserable to watch, and that's just the way I think it's going to be outside of Segment Coliseum oftentimes. But we can look at this basketball team and say, all right, where does it need to improve looking into next season? But I still think that there's elements of this team that they can win games late in the year. They just have to piece enough of them together. And again, if they make the tournament, this was a resoundingly successful third year for Mike White.
Yeah, what I saw on Monday from teamrankings.com, they have Georgia at an 85% chance to make the tournament, and that's with them projecting Georgia to go 4-5 over these next 9 games in the regular season. So that's an additional loss than I think Georgia really needs is to have 5 wins rather than 4. So I think Georgia's still in a pretty good spot. We'll have to see if they can capitalize. And the biggest thing to me is winning the games you're supposed to win. And, if you can steal 1 or maybe 2, you'd feel really, really good before we're talking about the SEC tournament in Nashville. Kipp, any thoughts on Georgia basketball and where they are going into the week?
I think their best chance to win is this next game against LSU. I think Mississippi State is a must win because that's a quad 2 loss. And this goes against everything Ben stands for, but talking about losses, but that would be a bad loss. That's a game that you should win and you lose, which means you got to do something you're not projected to do over those next 5 games, because I don't think they're going to be favored against any of those teams after that. So then you have to pull one your way to take – you still have that loss on your resume. So you have to get a quad 1 win to hope that the people, in charge of this think, okay, they made up for it. The last 2 games, I feel they're more in line with – the LSU game, where I think South Carolina is going to be a close game, but it is one they should win. They should beat Vanderbilt. So I think 4-5 is the right projection. You can't stumble. And if we're thinking about one they could steal, I think the Missouri game. I think they're not going to be favored in that game, but that's the one where I think it's a winnable game and it's at home. So if you happen to slip up, that's your kind of your chance to make up for that and still go into the tournament, knowing that you need to win one or two, but you should be able to get that done and lock up a seat in the tournament.
It's going to be a fascinating few weeks as Georgia gets closer and closer to the end of the regular season. Again, on Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, SEC Network, Georgia and LSU. Should be a fun one in Stegman.
If you need any proof that Mike White's third year has been better than his second year, just look at the men's basketball minute. It never takes a minute nowadays. It always takes 10 minutes plus.
No doubt. That's a product of the program and the culture that Mike White and his staff have put in. That's for sure. All right, we're getting ready to wrap up this episode, but Ben, I want to give you an opportunity to plug what you got cooking for the next day Wolk UGA recruiting show. What should the folks keep an eye out for when we record on Thursday?
Yeah, so we're gonna try a new time slot on Thursday. We're gonna do Thursday around 6 p.m. We have a great interview with the 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting, Andrew Ivins. I think that we got into the 2025 class, some of the 2026 class. We talked historically, some things that he maybe would have adjusted or things that he's maybe forecasting differently now than he did in the past. I think that it's going to be a really good one to check in on. We'll have more as it comes to recapping the most recent junior day. We'll talk a little bit more about Zack Fort, even though I know we got into it at the end of the last episode. And as always, we'll, see whose arrow is pointing up. We'll predict a commit. We'll do all those types of things as well.
I'll also plug for next week, probably will be on Wednesday. I will have a bonus podcast episode. I'm not going to get into too much in depth on what that will be. But I will say that there is a big auto race coming up pretty soon, and there's some Georgia-related folks surrounding it, and we're going to get into that on a podcast. I wanted to put that out there. Again, I will remind folks who are watching that 60% off sale for National Signing Day will be going on Wednesday. So we will get ready to wrap up this episode. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening after the fact. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast. Subscribe to our YouTube. Subscribe to our TikTok. All kinds of good content with Georgia men's basketball going on, football season, spring practice right around the corner, and Georgia baseball starting up in a couple of weeks. So we will end the episode right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.